I find we have a really strange relationship with winter as Canadians these days. And I think that is something that we need to overcome on a personal level to really, really embrace winter cycling.
I'm John Lewis, and you're listening to 360 Degree City, a podcast where we talk to all kinds of folks that are making life in cities better. Our hope is that at the end of each episode, you'll start to see your own city from a slightly different angle. One of my favorite things to do in the summertime is to go for long bike rides around the city. Calgary is blessed with an amazing river pathway system and a new cycle track system. And during those warm summer months, my bike is one of my primary ways of getting around the city. But I'm a fair weather cyclist. When the leaves start to fall and the snow hits the ground, I, along with many others in winter cities, put my bike away and leave it there until next spring. There are some people who are probably more strong, dedicated, and healthy than I am, bike all year round. To get you and myself ready for winter, we wanted to talk to Calgary's own winter biking aficionado.
My name's Tom Babin. I'm a writer, an author, a blogger with this focus on urban cycling. And I'm the author of Frostbike, The Joy, Pain, and Numbness of Winter Cycling, which is all about my experiences trying to determine if riding your bike in the winter is crazy or not.
Awesome. And so I wanted to start there with Frostbike. So what was it about your journey and experiences that led you to want to invest that much time into writing a book about it?
Well, it was my frustration sitting in my crappy minivan in traffic, mostly.
Part one.
Yes, that's part one. But, I had been a summertime bike commuter for a long time and had come around to seeing all the benefits of it. It was fast and it was easy and it made me feel good and it was healthy and it was affordable and all those sorts of things. And I would, at the end of the season, I would put my bike away in the garage like everybody else. And, I honestly, I just got tired of going back to driving was making me crazy. And I thought, well, let's just try to extend my season a little bit longer into the fall and into the winter. And then it was easier than I expected. And the next year I thought, well, maybe I can go year round. And, it wasn't all at once. I would, somewhere, those early winters, it would be a couple of times a week or even once a couple of times a month when the conditions were right. And then it just, I kept expecting it to be really difficult and it never was. And then that's when I really started formally asking that question, is this something that we should be doing more of us could be doing? And is there people around the world doing this kind of thing too? And that's sort of what led me down that path to explore the bigger question around it.
Right. Okay. So if, from your perspective, you're an expert in the area, why do you think you spoke about your own experience, but why do you think it's important to get people on their bikes in the wintertime?
Well, for all the same reasons, it works in the summertime.
Yeah.
It's so good personally. I think I find it, and I talk to so many people who ride bikes for transportation purposes who love the same things. The things it does for you personally. But it does so much good for cities, and we see this all over the world these days. The more people you get on bikes, it really changes the feel of the city. It makes streets more comfortable, more livable, safer. All those things apply in summer, and there's a handful of cities around the world that have really embraced year-round cycling, and they're seeing the same benefits in the winter as well. So all those great things that you can see when it's warm out applies when it's cold. So, and I suspected in the beginning that maybe people didn't ride in winter just out of habit because nobody else did. And that's certainly part of it. So I think there's some things you need to overcome, but it's certainly a reasonable thing to encourage people to do.
For sure. And I think that idea of behavior and habit and infrastructure and the supports around it are all this interesting interrelationship. So those cities that are taking year-round cycling seriously, what are some of the things that they've done to accommodate and encourage those habits over time?
Yeah. Number one by a mile is infrastructure.
Yeah.
It's all about safety for cycling, and we see this in cities that don't even have winter. If people don't feel safe riding their bike next to vehicles, they're just not going to do it. Mm-hmm. And in the great winter bike cities of the world, and I'm thinking of one I wrote about in my book, a city called Oulu in Finland, which is in northern Finland. They had this infrastructure built, and it was just a matter of maintaining it for the winter. They just got the plows out and started plowing it. And because cycling had been made so easy. I'm not even going to say it was ingrained. It was not a cultural thing. It was just made easier to ride your bike than to drive. People were doing it year round. And I think, in North America, we tend to think it's those crazy masochists who ride their bikes in winter. But in those great bike cities, it's not that at all. It's people don't ride for health or for the environment or because they're trying to prove a point or because they're rabid environmentalists. They ride because it's the fastest and most efficient choice to get to their destination. And so that's really what happens. I think infrastructure is the most important thing. But I think what we see here in North America, especially in cities here like in Calgary, where we do have sort of a budding bit of infrastructure, there is some attitude that goes into that. There are some cultural bits that go into it as well, because I find we have a really strange relationship with winter as Canadians these days. And I think that is something that we need to overcome on a personal level to really, really embrace winter cycling.
Mm-hmm. Maybe for those folks that are listening to this in other corners of the world, can you talk a bit about the relationship that you're talking about with Canadians in winter and how we approach it and think about it and talk about it?
I say Canadians as a Canadian, but I've seen the same attitude in other countries as well. Americans feel the same way. I met a bunch of Russians last year when I was in Moscow who had the same attitude. Yeah. And it's we live in a winter climate, and winter is an inescapable part of our lives. Yet I find it so strange that so many of us hate winter so much. Right? We dread it when it's here. We complain about it. We loathe it constantly, and it's crazy to me, but I understand it because I used to feel that way too, and winter cycling actually helped change my attitude a lot. And I get it. I mean, nobody wants to get out in the cold and the hassle of driving and all that kind of stuff too, but what I think, and I really believe this, is that attitude comes from the fact that it's so easy these days to escape winter. Like, you can go the whole season and really not be that bothered by it. You go from your heated house to your heated car, and you get downtown to your office, and it's warm, and you really never have to go outside. Mm-hmm. And I think that we've sort of lost that connection to the season. And because we've lost that connection, we've also lost our familiarity with it. And we've lost the practical stuff. Like, we don't know how to deal with it. I mean, so many people who don't own a pair of warm socks, and they live in a winter city. It seems crazy to me, right? Yeah. It's little things like that. If you're never out in winter, you don't know how to deal with it. It can be frightening. And I think winter is really scary when you're looking out your front window and there's it's really cold and snowy. Mm-hmm. But if you bundle up and get outside in there, and this happens to me all the time still, I get out there and I'm like, oh, this isn't so bad, right? Yeah. So I think we have these weird expectations of winter. I think we think it's worse than it really is. And that really feeds into this fear of winter in general and winter cycling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what's that old saying that there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing.
Yes, that's right.
That pertains particularly. I think that's exclusively a winter thing, but it's,
And it pertains, I've heard that in many countries, that same saying.
So what do you think is the biggest misconception about biking in the wintertime?
That it's hard. People are scared of it. They're frightened. They think they're going to slip and fall. They think they're going to freeze. That's reasonable to think that, but it's really easy to get over those things. For one thing, the practical stuff, staying warm on a bike in winter is really easy because once you start pedaling, that internal furnace starts going. And I have the opposite problem, and I still deal with this, is that I get too hot. I end up getting to the office in the morning all sweaty. And so it's never a problem. And I used to set this level. I'd say I'd only ride if it's minus 5 degrees Celsius and warmer. Other than that, it's too cold for me. And then minus 5 was really easy. So that dropped to minus 10, and it was minus 20. And last year we had a cold winter here, and I rode days when it was minus 25, minus 30 degrees Celsius, which probably sounds insane to some people in some cities, but I was surprised again. It was not that hard. You take the precautions, you dress for it, you get out and you do it, and it's fine. As far as the other things about the other things that frighten people, the slipping and falling, mm-hmm. For me, that's all a question of infrastructure. If you have a safe, separated bike network that is well maintained in winter, it's cleared of snow, the ice patches are dealt with, that really removes a lot of those problems. We have great gear for bikes now too that we never used to. When I first started, there's studded tires are like magic, and they're much cheaper than they used to be. You see people riding those big fat bikes that are built for snow. And the stability on those is amazing. So there really is a lot of ways to get around some of these things that cause fear in people.
Mm-hmm. So is the infrastructure question as simple as separated and cleared?
Well, that's yes, on one level, sure. Clearing is harder than I think. It's tricky to keep bike lanes clear, you don't have the same, it's a different set of problems than clearing a road. But there's been lots of work done, even in the last 4 or 5 years. A lot of the winter cities have been talking a lot and sharing ideas. And there's equipment that can do it now. And there's best practices about, unsexy things like laying down brine on the night before a snowfall so that the snow comes up easier the next day. Those kinds of things are really cool. But yeah, I would say as far as infrastructure goes, the separation is even more important in winter than in summer because you want to be further away from cars, right? You don't want to slip under the wheels of a vehicle. And connectivity too is more important in winter. We see this in a lot of North American cities where there's bits of bike infrastructure built here and there. And without a coherent connected network that doesn't get you anywhere, it's really useless for a lot of people. And that's even more so in winter. If you don't have like a safe route from your door to your door, even if there's a little bit that you have to, roll over a snowbank or ride beside vehicles, then it's even more discouraging in the wintertime than the summertime. So all those things that work in summer also apply in winter, but I think they're even more important when it's cold and snowy out.
Right. And so you talked about the city in Finland. What are some other examples that you found really informative and inspiring for making year-round cycling a reality? And can you maybe talk about the process of change that some of those have happened? Like, has some been decades-long battles or some overnight successes?
Yeah. Well, on one level, what's inspiring, I think, is the cities that always come up in conversation about cycling, the Amsterdams and the Copenhagens of the world. And that's just because the infrastructure has been built over a period of time, and it's inspiring to see that many people ride bikes. What I found inspiring about those cities in particular is sort of the nonchalance about the season that a lot of the people I met there have. So when it's wintertime, here we tend to freak out about it, and they've got that sort of Scandinavian attitude where it's like, well, just deal with it, and they just put on their jacket and they go. I mean, that's the way they get to work. So I find that sort of attitude inspiring. And I think if you're looking at other cities in North America, the best one to look at for me is Montreal. I mean, Montreal it's really informative. The whole story of Montreal's bike infrastructure is really interesting for other cities because they kind of took a different path. Back in the 80s, when bike advocacy was all about vehicular cycling, which is an old idea in which cyclists should be treated the same as motorists and bikes and cars should be mixed together. That was kind of the overriding attitude at the time, or the philosophy at the time. And that permeated all North American cities, really, except for Montreal. And I've talked to people in Montreal about this who've been bike advocates for a long time. And, their explanation was, well, we just had a deeper connection to what was happening in Europe at the time. And that was really the basis of some of the first separated bike lanes. And the first separated bike lane in North America was built in Montreal in the 80s. That seems astounding to me now because we've only talked about it for 5 or 6 or maybe 10 years in other cities as well. But to see that happening there and the success that it had early on, and then how over the last 30 or 40 years, how they've built a network has been really interesting. And I think that's the process a lot of cities need to go through. But you can learn from what's happened elsewhere. But even Montreal, when it comes to winter, was never a perfect bike city. I mean, they have a hard winter. It's got a lot of snow. There's a lot of ice. They got ice storms, that sort of thing. So it's tricky. It's even hard to walk in Montreal in winter sometimes. But even the last couple of years, they've come around. They never used to clear a lot of the lanes. They're starting to do that now. There never used to be a cleared path across the bridges, across the river, and that's starting to happen again now. There's talk about heated pathways or heated routes on the bridges to keep the ice and snow clear, that sort of stuff. So they're starting to come around now too. So it's always interesting to see what Montreal is doing. They seem to be a little bit ahead of most North American cities.
And have those recent changes, have those been a result of enlightened folks in the transportation department or advocates in the cycling community? Have you observed how that's happened?
I think it's a bit of both. There's a really strong advocacy community in all of Quebec, actually. And I think they've really pushed it. And I think what drives a lot of this too is data. They've been collecting great data, and they see how people are using those bike lanes. And as a couple stay open through winter and the numbers stay up there, the number of people using them stays up. I think it shows planners and engineers that, if you make conditions right, people will continue to use them. I mean, you're never going to see, I think, the same number of people riding in the summer or in the winter as the summer. But you can see, a good number of it. We're seeing in a lot of places, like the number of people riding in winter now matches what it was in summertime a few years ago. So, you have to keep those things in mind. But I think it was a culture of cycling. Cycling has really become a symbol of the city. They were the first North American city with the bike share program, with the Bixie program. So that it really is part of the sort of the feel of the city now too. And when that went away in winter, I think it didn't sit well with a lot of people. So I think it was probably advocates. I think it was people at City Hall recognizing that, and also a lot of cyclists who were annoyed that they couldn't ride all year round. That always helps. It's the squeaky wheels in some cases.
Yeah, for sure. Squeaky bike wheels.
I should say too about other cities that are interesting to watch, and it's Calgary and Edmonton here in Alberta, for one thing, and that both cities have had a unique approach to bike infrastructure, and that is installing an entire completed network of bike lanes all at once. Most cities do them piecemeal. They're disconnected for a long time. But to do them all at once and see the growth in that, I think is really interesting. And we're seeing more cities sort of look at that model as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if I have my recent numbers right, it's here in Calgary, it's about 30% of the cyclists continue to ride in winter months.
Yeah, which is similar numbers to what we see in a lot of other cities. Okay. I think that's a pretty good thing to strive for.
Yeah. Okay. So as a kind of benchmark, that's a pretty good one to
I mean, in Oulu, Finland, where they've been doing this for 30 years, it's higher, of course, but that 30% number is, I think it's surprising to some people because there's this attitude out there that nobody's going to ride in winter and you're crazy to try that.
Yeah, for sure.
But to see that 30% continue is encouraging. And also that 30% is growing, right? It's not like, I suspected this at one point, that it was a hardcore group of 30% of the people. They're going to ride no matter what. But that number does continue to grow. As the overall number of cyclists grows year round in Calgary, the number of winter cyclists is growing as well too. Yeah. So I think that shows you that it's not just a hardcore group of crazy people. It's regular people who see biking as a functional thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think again, it goes back to that relationship between culture, habit, infrastructure. Yeah. Of I cycle with she's now 8 years old in a lot of places, and there is no way in hell I would go anywhere near downtown until the tracks were put in. And then just on the non-winter side of things, I was in Spain last fall, and of course they've got a really long culture of walking, and sort of being out in public is where you live your life, and they actually have spaces for people to do that. So one of the things that stood out for me was the amount of senior citizens that were just out walking, just so many more than you would see in a typical North American city, both because there's actual safe space for them to do it, but they've done it over the course of their lifetime. And so it's that intersection of culture and infrastructure is super interesting. And I think Mayor Nenshi, when they were talking about the West LRT leg, building that, and there are people saying, well, there won't be the ridership. Well, no, I think he was using that argument for the cycle tracks. And he said that, we didn't have a lot of people using the west leg of the LRT until we actually built it.
Yeah. Cyclists like to say you can't measure the number of cyclists. It's like measuring the number. It's like determining whether to build a bridge by seeing how many people are swimming across the river. Yeah. That one. Yeah. I think it's true. And you see that in all sorts of places. It's encouraging as a cyclist, to see other people out there on bikes too. Sure. So I do think it builds upon each other. You feel more comfortable with more people out there. And we've seen in data from other cities that it's safer too. The more people who are riding bikes, the safer it gets for everybody. I think motorists just get used to seeing it. It's not a surprise anymore. Yeah, and everyone sort of gets used to it. Yeah,
for sure. So if you were to, if someone's listening to us right now and they were giving thought as winter's coming in the Northern Hemisphere to giving winter cycling a try, what would be the top tips that you would give those folks?
I always say this and it never satisfies anyone, but I say, just try it. Figure it out as you go. I think we kind of overthink these things. You don't need to go out and buy a whole bunch of new stuff. I don't wear special clothing. I just wear my regular warm winter clothes. You don't need a special bike, but I do say a couple of things that make it easier. Last year, I bought a pair of studded tires. Actually, I only bought one studded tire and put it on the front. And I'd forgotten how good they were. So if you're worried about slipping and falling, that's an amazing, easy investment to make. And that really makes you feel more confident in your riding. Keep your extremities warm. You need a good pair of gloves and some decent boots. In the climate that I ride in, there's we have a lot of freeze melt cycles. There's a lot of water and salt, and it tends to corrode your bike. So I actually have a separate bike for winter. And for 15 years, I rode this crappy old mountain bike that, I never took any care of. I put a new chain on it occasionally, and that was it. So if you have a beautiful ride that you are in love with and you don't want to ruin it, you might want to think about that.
Yeah. Your Instagram worthy bike, you might want to just park away for the,
That's right.
for the warmer months.
I would say that if you need one, just troll some back alleys. You'll find one eventually and just pick it up and go for it. But there's lots most cities have community bike shops now where you can get refurbished bikes for really cheap. So, that's what I would do for a long time. But really, it's about trial and error. Don't be discouraged. The first ride is your hardest ride ever. It gets easier from the first one. You find a different route sometimes. I tend to take a different route in winter that has fewer cars and is a little, depending on the day, sometimes it's plowed earlier than other days. So you sort of have to think about that as well. And most importantly, maybe for those hardcore cyclists, is slow down. Sometimes you have to adjust to your speed, and it's hard for, if you're really riding for a workout, it can be hard to talk yourself into slowing down a bit, but it really does make a difference. And that is a huge change and really difficult for some people to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, as a definite fair weather cyclist, I appreciate the work you do and your simple approach, like to not make it so technically challenging and expensive that you wouldn't even think you could give it a shot. So.
Yeah, you don't have to do that for sure. You'll have to get you changed. If you want to spend a lot of money, you go to your bike shop, they'll get you kitted out really good and you'll feel great as well. But it's certainly not necessary to do any of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So one final question we asked all our guests is, can you tell us about a city that you love and why?
Oh, I already talked about it so much. I'm going to say Montreal again. I love it as a Canadian city. I fell in love with it as a bike city. But I just love the vibe a bit of it now. I visit any chance I get. It just feels like a place you want to spend your time with. I love the culture of it. I love the focus on art, all that sort of stuff. So, any chance I get, I spend as much time in Montreal as possible.
This conversation with Tom has definitely inspired me to keep my biking gear for a little longer into the frosty months. I hope you've also been encouraged to try out the joy, pain, and numbness of winter cycling. If you have any additional tips on how to get the best out of a winter commute by bike, let us know. To learn more about the ways that bicycles can make our lives better, check out Tom's blog at shifter.info. The blog discusses all sorts of topics, from how to make short bike rides easier, tips for keeping your feet warm while riding a bike, and how to make a left turn while cycling. 360 Degree City is created by the team at Intelligent Futures. To learn more about the work we do, you can go to intelligentfutures.ca. If you like the podcast, please share it with someone that might be interested in seeing their own city from a different angle. I'm John Lewis. Thanks for stopping by.